kick myself for, I don't know how this happened, for allowing me to get so far behind. Because I am having unless I get a negative COVID test tomorrow, because they're requiring me to do that. I am having the surgery on Thursday, which means we've got today and a week from Thursday to do the golem's eye, or today, and I think I put either in the email or in the announcement on the D2L page today, and then send you a video covering the rest of the golem's eye, which I don't really want to do, but I don't want us to get more behind because I really want us to finish in person, assuming the rest of the semester goes the way it should go, the Garth Nix trilogy. So I'm kind of perplexed as to how that's going to happen, but we'll do our best. Let's start. I'm going to skip the prologue, other than to say it's significant for the simple reason that we see the only time we see, and we only see him, so to speak, from a distance. William, right? Yeah, William Gladstone, Prime Minister of England within the novel. And somewhere in here, I don't know if we'll get to it today. If I can find the note real quickly. Or it might have been in the previous book that I wrote it down. It was in the previous book. I should have brought that sheet. William Gladstone, as I mentioned before, as we were discussing Bartimaeus, was a real British Prime Minister. Also mentioned, I believe, when he's first brought up, is Benjamin Disraeli. He was conservative. Gladstone was liberal. And they kind of went back and forth. One of them served for a couple of years, few years, then the other one, then a bit of time passed, and one of them came back. Gladstone ended up serving quite a few more years than Benjamin Disraeli did. So one of the things that we see Stroud, getting my authors confused my brain, that we see Stroud do is he kind of blends, what do you want to call it? The primary world and the secondary world. That is the real world and the imaginary world of the novel. And he does that through the use of places. London, Prague is mentioned. America is mentioned, because of the war coming up and that kind of thing, or the war that is mentioned, and several other things, right? If you paid attention as you were reading, in the opening, I don't know, it's probably in first 50 or 60 pages, not including the prologue, we get this description of London. And we hear about the city, okay, which is the financial sector of London. We read about John walking, down a road, crossing over Regent Street, making his way up Haymarket. You could do all of that today. I mean, those are actual roads. It's an actual area of London. Haymarket is an old name. It literally goes back to the Middle Ages, where it was the hay market, where you buy straw and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things he's doing there is he's adding this kind of sense of realism to it. But he often does what when he does that? For example, he talks about the wars or the war in the colonies. That's us, okay? Big question, or maybe not a big question, interesting question. When do you think this novel is set? What time frame? The prologue gives us a date. Look at the opening of the prologue. It says Prague, and then gives a date, a year. 1868, okay? So that's one of the years Gladstone is in power within this world, okay? So are we given any indication, let's say, we're not going to cover half of this today, but let's say we did. Within the first book, in the first half of this book, are we given any indication of how long it's been, and I think we are, since Gladstone? 10 years? 20 years?
He's dead and there's statues of him all over the place. So
He's dead, there's statues of him all over the place. He's buried in Westminster Abbey. Okay? Another little interesting kind of side question that I don't think there's an answer to anywhere in the novels. We get London described as, towers, churches, palaces. There are various palaces in London. There's St. James Palace. There's, Westminster, kind of a palace. There's Hampton Court Palace, which is a little bit outside London, etc. But it mentions churches. And I always find this interesting. There's no mention at all anywhere in these three books. In fact, then there's no mention anywhere at all in Stroud's Lockwood series that I think it's at the end of the first book. You get a little chapter or blurb for the first Lockwood book of any kind of religious life. That is, there's no mention of any church activity. There are churches, but there's no mention of the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, or people saying prayers or going to church. It's just like there's these buildings to nothing, so to speak, right? Kind of an interesting question as to why. Why does he do that? Might he be making a comment about, I don't know, the usefulness of the church or churches in that world, and possibly in our world, things like that. Anyways, so how far have you read into this? Let me ask this first. Has anybody gotten to part 2, which is begins on 123? No, you have, okay, only one have. Okay, let me see that. I'm not going to go very far then, so we probably won't be here very long. Because I really don't want to, give, let me ask this question. This will help determine where we go. Other than for the requirements for this class, you got to take quizzes, that kind of stuff. Are you invested at all in reading this? That is, do you have a desire to read this, other than what's required? And, you don't have to, brown nose, yes, of course I am, But if you are, you know, and I saw a couple of eyes go yes or heads kind of go yes, and a couple like, you know, go away. Okay. We won't go up to. We'll stop before part 2 then. Which means probably what I'll do for the remainder of, we won't be here. Well, take that back. I was going to say we won't be here the whole time today, but we might. Probably what I'll do then is I will send a link for a lecture to cover quite a bit of the material after today, and probably leave some for us to finish on. What day is it? What day is today? Today's Tuesday. On, we don't have class on.
We won't meet till next Thursday.
Is that the 14th? Yeah, that is the 14th. Till next Thursday, the 14th. I was getting my dates screwed up. I thought Tuesday was the 14th. Trying to figure out where. We'll probably try to cover about the last 100 pages or so next Thursday. So there'll be a big chunk in the middle that I'll send a link to. And what may happen is the link may have to be, because I've not taught these as much as I have the per day. The link may have to be to cover the whole book, and then we'll regurgitate, you know, some of what's left. Okay, so let's back up. How much time has passed between this book and the previous book? 2 years. How old was, let's call him by the name he's generally called in here. How old is John then now? 14. We're going to be told it's actually 2 years, 8 months have passed, okay? So he's closer to the 15, all right? What position does he hold? Well, let me back up for a moment. What did he do at the end of the previous book? The end of Bartimaeus, Amulet of Samarkand? How did that book conclude? And I don't mean, you know, sending Bartimaeus off. I mean, what was the big climax? They've got that big conference, right? That Simon Lovelace's girlfriend has organized outside London, okay? And it turns out that was all a ruse to get all the members of power, all the members of parliament and government together so that Simon Lovelace could do what? Or attempt to do what?
Attempt to kill by killing all of them.
Attempt to kill all of them and take control, right? And we're told there by one of the conspirators, Schuyler, I think it is, who was Simon Lovelace's master, okay, when he was an apprentice, so to speak. What does he say about prime ministers in power? How do they get their power? I don't mean, you know, demons. Usually, he implies, they get it by killing the person in power before them. It's a coup, essentially, all right? How does that jive with what his history teacher, Mr. Purcell, told him? What does he say about magicians and power and, you know, the levers of government and all that kind of thing?
Supposed to be the most honorable and patriotic.
It's honorable, the magicians are there for our good, blah, blah, blah. Okay. What is Purcell doing? What is Stroud saying the history teacher is spouting? Propaganda. Lies. It's not truth, right? Not at all. Okay, so is Stroud suggesting, by putting that in the mouth of the history teachers teach propaganda? I think yes, to an extent he is. You know, there's a phrase, to the victor go the spoils of war, right? What is one of the spoils of war? Because to the victor also goes what? Do the losers write the history? No. No, the victors do. Here's an example. Here's an example from our real world. Has nothing to do necessarily with this. The real King Richard III in England, okay? 1483, 1485 was when he was king, right? From what we know from historical sources, the very, very few that survive, okay? Letters, diary entries about him, a few official documents, things, things like that. From that material, we can kind of gather this image of a fairly good administrator. Okay, that's what a king essentially does, the top bureaucrat. That he was fairly good for the common people, as well as, the courtiers and all that kind of stuff, and things like that. Why did I say there are relatively little historical documents and things like that survive? Well, I mentioned, his dates, 1483, 1485. In 1485, and the anniversary of this is coming up, pretty sure it's in October, there was the Battle of what's called Bosworth Field, right? And Richard III died there. He was defeated by Henry Tudor, who became Henry VII, father of Henry VIII, right? Henry, in the early part of Henry VIII's reign, 1518 or so, till the end of his reign, 1545, about 45 or 46. One of the things Henry did is he had, histories written. I don't mean he commissioned them. I mean, people were sucking up to him by writing poems, plays, and histories about previous events. Okay? Henry VIII dies. His eldest son, his only son, becomes king for a few years. He dies. His eldest daughter, son, daughter, are all half children. They're half related because of all his different wives. His eldest daughter becomes queen. She reigns for 5 years. She dies. And then his second daughter, second eldest child, becomes queen. That's Queen Elizabeth I, right? She has a really long reign. Okay? It's during her reign that Shakespeare writes. During most of her reign. Shakespeare writes a little bit after she dies also. During her reign, about 1592, 1593, Shakespeare writes his tragedy of King Richard III. Okay? In that tragedy, Shakespeare portrays Richard III as a hunchback and as evil. I mean, down and out, rotten, evil incarnate. Okay? That became the dominant perspective on Richard III for the next 400 years, 500 years. Everybody thought Richard was evil, that he was hunchback. There was no proof that he was hunchback, okay? So he dies, and the quote-unquote good that he did died with him. Shakespeare has a line in Julius Caesar there where Mark Antony talks about Caesar and says, the good that men do is interred with their bones, evil lives after. The good that they do dies with them. Think of Mordant. What does Terran think of Mordant? He's a rotten SOB, right? He tried to take the Black Cauldron. And Gwydion says, no, you can't judge him based on one action. The whole rest of his life, he did good stuff, right? Shakespeare, the good that men do is often turned with their bones. The evil lives hereafter, okay? Richard III's reputation is built entirely on Shakespeare's. Why? Because Shakespeare was sucking up to Queen Elizabeth, who is a descendant, granddaughter, of the guy who defeated Richard III. Okay? All of that just a long way of saying, to the victor go the spoils of war, and to the victor goes the recording of history. Purcell is writing, speaking, let's say, teaching, long after Gladstone has defeated his enemies. Okay? But we don't hear this part in that book. Okay? Here's this part. What does Nathaniel learn about history, let's say, fairly early on in this book? It's within the first 100 pages. What do we hear? Excuse me, not Nathaniel, Kitty and her friend Jacob. What do they hear in class about the current political situation, and I mean the current political structure? How long has it been this way that magicians have been in power? We don't get an actual time frame. Who was in power before the magicians? Commoners. We're told and what we're going to do is probably for about the first 100 pages or so, we're going to jump around a bit. Page 52 and 53. So she's in history. Again, no, it's history. It's not social studies, it's not government, it's not civics. Okay? History was another important subject. Daily they received instruction in the glorious development of the British state. Okay? How do we know that's not history? Notice how the British state is described. In the glorious development of the British state. What's that glorious development? What kind of language is that? It's superlative. It's praising. Okay? It's not objective. History, so to speak, is supposed to be objective. Here are the facts. Here are the dates. Here are the rulers. This is editorializing. Okay? Kitty enjoyed these lessons, which featured many stories of magic far-off lands, but she thinks there's some limitations. So she asks, tell us more about the government that Mr. Gladstone overthrew. You say it had a parliament already. We've got a parliament now. So why was the old one so wicked? Well, Kitty, if you'd been listening properly, you'd have heard me say that the old parliament was not wicked so much as weak. That is, it wasn't evil, it was weak, powerless. What's the difference between having power, not having power, and being evil? How did Underwood define a bad magician? Incompetence. What does incompetence mean? If you're incompetent, you can't do what? Which means you're weak. Okay? It was run by ordinary people like you and me who did not have any magical powers. Imagine that. Of course, that meant they were constantly getting harassed by other, stronger countries, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Notice, he doesn't say anything about these other countries and their political systems. He doesn't say they're magical or non-magical. Okay? So, top of 53. We're going to stop here for a moment and then go back. She says, well, if the old parliament was so, and notice she uses the word, incompetent, how come the fat emperor never invaded Britain? Who's the fat emperor? We saw him at the beginning in the prologue. Okay? The emperor who resided in Prague. He says Britain was lucky. That's all. In other words, there is no reason. I can't give you a reason why he didn't. All right? So, go back. 2 years later, Nathaniel defeated the plot, right? He took the amulet of Samarkand from Lovelace, who had gotten it back. And then what does he do? The real climax of that novel. So he's got the amulet of Samarkand. What does that allow you to do? You know, think of this. It makes you invulnerable, right? What happens if, you know, I'm wearing this, and one of you have a demon, a freed, marid, whatever, shoot a spell at me or try to come at me? It just sucks it up. It takes all that power into it. It's a shield. It protects the wearer, okay? So, he now has this thing in his hands, which makes him extremely powerful, right? It doesn't give him power to do things. It gives him power of protection, so nobody else can do anything to him. And he goes up to the Prime Minister, Rupert Devereux, who's nearly unconscious and lying on the floor, and bows down in hands it to him. Okay? And Bartimaeus makes a comment about, you know, what panache, you know, what presentation. This kid, he's going to go a long ways. Okay? And just before Bartimaeus leaves, he gives some words of advice. What's the number one word of advice? Who does he warn Nathaniel about? Jessica Whitwell, his new mistress, his new master. Okay? So he warns him about her. What does he warn Nathaniel about himself? What does he say Nathaniel has that he needs to protect? The very thing that Lovelace says is a danger. Remember when Lovelace comes for the big scene where the house gets destroyed and whatever? You know, I don't want to give away too much because the quiz is still up, I think. Nathaniel comes down and tries to do what in that scene? He tries to take the blame, right? For getting the amulet and the whole 9 yards. And Love's like, what? This is honor? Integrity? And what does he teach Nathaniel? Wizards don't have honor. Magicians, sorry. Magicians don't have honor. Honor doesn't enter the equation. Okay? And Nathaniel sees how much honor does not enter the equation because of what Lovelace does. Who does not need to be killed? You could say Nathaniel does because of what he did. You could say Underwood did because he's a moron. Okay? What about Mrs. Underwood? She hasn't done anything wrong. Okay, she could be an eyewitness, you could go there. But she's innocent of everything. And she still gets killed. All right? So all that's previous. But that's in Nathaniel's mind. All right, so we begin here, and he's 2 years older. He's a member of the government. In fact, he's what member of the government? What's his job? He's not just a filing clerk. Louder? He's in internal affairs. What's his, anybody remember his job title? He's assistant to the minister. Okay? His master, Underwood, was also in internal affairs, but he wasn't assistant to the minister. Assistant to the minister means he's kind of where on the organizational chart. Here's internal affairs. Julius Tallow is the boss of internal affairs. Where's Nathaniel?
He's the XO.
Yeah, he's the XO, executive officer. He's the next one in command. And he's how old? He's not even 15 yet. Who is over Julius Tallow? Jessica Whitwell. Okay? Because internal affairs is part of the security division. Internal security. Right? You know, FBI, call it what you want. All right? So, we get the description of London, page 21 following. 2 years had passed, we're told, page 23. 25, we're told about Nathaniel's master, Jessica Whitwell, magician of indeterminate age, that is, you can't tell how old she is, cropped white hair, framed up with slender, tending to the skeletal. She's reckoned one of the four most potent magicians in the government. Foremost powerful positions in the government. So, Jessica Whitwell is one of them. Who's another one? Is Julius Tallow? No. Depending upon how far you've read, Henry Duval, he's in charge of what? Police. She's, well, we'll just put national security, okay? He's in charge of the police. Who are the other two? Prime Minister. We're told he is a, where are we told that? I was just reading it this morning. It's not second rate. Secondary. He was a magician of secondary power. Okay? So in terms of his power, he's not up there with Jessica Whitwell or Henry Duval. I'm going to leave the other two blank for right now. Where is, we're told, Devereux's power? His political connections, or not political connections. His, what's the word I want? Oh, man, it's right there. Political. Yeah. Not inclinations. Prowess, that's a good word. His political prowess. His Bill Clintonism. His natural political abilities. That's the word I want. His political abilities. He doesn't do anything politically wrong. He always knows how to read the situation for its main political impact for him on his behalf. Okay? And he does what in that regard? Okay, here's an example. And I'm not betraying politics or anything like that. What's the difference? You guys might be too young to know this. I'll try. What's the difference between, here's this one. I was going to say Bill Clinton and Joe Biden. What's the difference between Barack Obama and Joe Biden? Barack Obama had sense, okay. What else? Obama knew how to work a room. Joe Biden doesn't really. He doesn't command authority the way Obama could, okay, or the way Clinton could. Clinton could walk into a room and make everybody feel like he loves them and they love him. Joe Biden walks into a room and people start, F Joe Biden, the chants around, the country and such. Okay? He doesn't have that kind of connection. That's what Rupert Devereux has. Okay? With not only magicians, but commoners too. Okay? So, back up to where I was. He has his lessons with her. She's impressed, page 26, by his summoning abilities. Notice he doesn't tell her, I've already summoned a mid-level Jinny even before, by the time I was 12. It's not a problem for me. Okay? He gets put in charge of what problem? Problem that we saw the beginning of in the previous book. The resistance. Why is it called that? You gotta know a little bit of history, real history here. The French resistance during the Second World War. Okay? Stroud is using that notion underlies this, okay, of, French commoners, store owners, cafe owners, bakers, etc., who went about their daily lives during the day, and then in the evenings, they plotted, they got together, they organized, they acted in a way to harm or hinder the Nazi war effort. Blowing up train stations, blowing up bridges, taking out, Gestapo agents, when they would be found alone, all those kinds of things. So what's the resistance's goal? From what we can tell early on, what does it seem to be? Does it want to overthrow the government? From what we can tell? If it does, how are they going about that? If you want to overthrow the government, what do you have to provide? The people that you want to rise up. What did Tom Jefferson and a few others write that we celebrate every July 4th? The Declaration of Independence, right? What's the purpose of the Declaration of Independence? It's the rationale for the resistance. Okay? What rationale who are the three main members of the resistance that we meet? We met them in the first book. Kitty, Stanley, and Fred, right? They're all teens. What seems to be their deal? What are they going about doing? They rob people. They rob buildings. And every now and then, there's a little explosion. Is it really going to overthrow the government? No. So they're kind of like gnats, buzzing away, stinging and biting every now and then. They're just enough to be a problem. And a problem that bothers the members of government. Okay? Kind of like, I shouldn't go there. No, I'm not going to go there. Page 31. So we're told, no, let me back up, 29. Mandrake arrives to work the morning that this begins. And we're told, for reasons of his own, Nathaniel had long been interested in internal affairs, a subdepartment of the sprawling security apparatus headed by Jessica Whitwell. Okay? It does a variety of, investigations and such. And we find out within months he'd maneuvered his way through a succession of humdrum clerical jobs until he was assistant to the Internal Affairs Minister himself. Now, notice the language that's used. He did what? He maneuvered his way. What's it mean to maneuver?
Avoid obstacles.
You avoid obstacles. What else do you do? You find the easy routes. Okay. How do you sometimes avoid obstacles? You remove them. Okay. What is this suggesting to us about Nathaniel? Is he just merely tiptoeing around people to not get on anybody's bad side? Or is he overpowering? And I don't mean beating down, terminating, but making somebody not look as good and thus shining the light on himself. Yeah, he's doing that. Why? What motivates him? What's he want? What's every politician want? I think I can say this as a blanket, statement. Power. Power. Okay? Power to, maybe if the politician is quote unquote honorable, to effect good change. Okay? Maybe it's power to make myself rich. So, we get the description of Julius Tallow, and page 30, we're told at the bottom, Tallow soon realized the extent of his assistant's talents, directed him to an important and taxing task, pursuit of the shadowy group known as the Resistance. The motives of the zealots were transparent. They were opposed to the benevolent leadership of the magicians and eager to return to the anarchy of commoners' rule. From whose perspective is that written? The magicians. How do you know?
Because it says, where was it?
Bottom of 30.
Oh yeah, it says anarchy.
Because it refers to the commoners' rule as anarchy, and it refers to the magician's rule as benevolent. Okay? If the commoners rule, if the commoners had rule, if the commoners ran parliament, then that's the antithesis of anarchy. Anarchy means what?
Chaos.
Yeah. An against archy. Order. Hierarchy, a higher order. Anarchy is against order. So if the commoners are in power, then that's order by sheer definition. To the magicians, it's anarchy. Why? Don't think magicians, commoners. Think Republicans, Democrats. When the Democrats are in power, the Republicans think what? This is anarchy. Why? Because we're not in power. And when the Republicans are in power, the Democrats think what? This is anarchy. Because they're in power and we. It's, the shoes on the other foot, or the grass is greener on the other side of the fence mentality. Right? In the most audacious attack of all, the resistance had even attempted to assassinate the prime minister. The government's response was draconian. Well, when was that? When did the resistance attempt to assassinate the prime minister? Did that happen in this book? Was that mentioned other than this in this book? Nope. So when was it? That was the Lovelace affair. But Lovelace wasn't part of the resistance, was it? So, who is saying that that was the resistance?
Nathaniel.
Keep going. What is that statement an example of? That the resistance attempted to assassinate the prime minister.
Propaganda.
Word we've used a few times. It's propaganda by the state. Why? Why blame that incident on commoners?
Because it was found that the magicians tried to do it, it would only undermine them.
Christopher Wray, current director of the FBI. What if we were to discover, I'm not going back to Trump and stuff, let's put it right now. What if we were to discover that the FBI was attempting now to undermine President Biden? What would it do to the FBI's, reputation? Or let's say the head of the CIA, April something, can't remember. Hey, Avril Haines is the director of the CIA. It would undercut it, right? Back in the 70s, when it was discovered the CIA was doing a whole lot of really, really bad stuff, the CIA, there was a commission called the Church Commission, named after Senator Frank Church, Democrat, I think, from Idaho. It kind of reined in the CIA. Okay? And the CIA had a really bad name for many, many years after that. If it was found out that members of the government were trying to bring down the government, what does that do in the thinking of other members of the government, but more importantly, in the populace? What is the majority of the population? Magical or non-magical?
Non-magical.
Non-magical. Huge majority. So if a minority controls, how do you keep the majority under control? Think modern day China. How many people live in China? How many Chinese are there?
Over a billion.
Yeah, it's like 1.4 billion. There's 7 billion people on the planet. Okay? It's either 1.4 or 1.5 billion. How many of those 1.4 billion are members of the Chinese Communist Party? It's 100 million. 100 million. It's not like, 10% of the population. It's a small minority. So how do you get that small minority to keep control? Well, through that, what else? Think of this world. Do commoners have a high standard of living? We get introduced to Kitty and her family. What kind of home do they live in? Three people in the family. There are 2 bedrooms. There's one kind of living room and kitchen area, and there's a bathroom out back. I don't know if the out back means it's actually part of the house or it's like an outhouse. Okay? And all these houses are crammed together. They're like, condominiums almost. All right? That's pretty average for commoners. We're going to see later on, in fact, we see it in these first 100 pages or so, every now and then. Commoners generally live what kind of existence? If we were talking about our society, where would they be on the social stratus or economic status, the stratus? Are they middle class? No. They're, at the best, lower middle class and below. Even a family like the Hiernets, Kitty's friend Jacob Hiernet, his father runs a copying business, publishing business, so to speak, where everything is done by hand. Okay? Kitty assumes he ought to make a ton of money. Because who does he do the books for? Solely magicians. And they're all handmade. And she thinks, man, they ought to be paying hand over fist for this. And Jacob says, are you kidding? So why doesn't he make a lot of
Commoner work.
money? Okay, it's commoner work. What else? What can the magicians do to him? They can cut off his work entirely. And then he becomes totally destitute. Okay? So, he knew nothing, page 31. He knew nothing of the three commoners beyond their names, Fred, Stanley, and Kitty. Fred and Stanley were paper boys. Nathaniel's first act, send orbs out to track paper boys. Doesn't do any good. Next, he sends out some adult agents. Doesn't do any good. All right? He meets up with Jane Farrar, or Jane Farrar meets up with him. Pages 33 and following. Notice, she's 3 or 4 years older than him. She's described as very smart, very bright. She's described as a looker, so that whenever Nathaniel gets around her, he gets a little tongue-tied, and he's aware of how gawky and nerdy he is. Okay? Page 35. 2 Foliots come into Nathaniel's summoning chamber, and he questions them. What has he sent them out to do? They go out disguised as children, as orphans and waifs, to try to get into the resistance. And we're told, page 35, the blonde orphan says, "It's no good, master. The street kids just ignore us. If we're lucky," the tousled orphan agreed, "those that don't tend to throw things at us." What? Oh, cans, bottles, small rocks and things. When Nathaniel says what, he doesn't mean, what do they throw at you? He means, what? He's exasperated. Okay? And so he tells us, I don't mean that. I mean, what's happened to a spot of common humanity? What's he mean by that? And notice the irony of his saying that. What common humanity does he show for these children? None. Is he different in a, let's say a DNA way than these children, these orphans and such? No, he's not. Notice, this is not like the Harry Potter world where you are born magical. You have an innate ability. How does he have his power? He knows the spells. He knows the incantations. So if you can read, and you can read well, and you can enunciate clearly, and you can draw a perfect circle or pentagram and such, you too can have this power. Notice, are the commoners taught these subjects? No. What's the matter with them? You're both sweet, you're both thin, you're both faintly pathetic. Surely they'd take you under their wings. Okay? Note, they treat us with revulsion. It's almost as if they can see us as we really are. And that's going to be something that gets traced throughout this book and the next book. Okay? We're going to find out that every now and then there are people who are born with the ability to see demons, to see beyond the first normal, let's say, human plane. And they can see magical objects, like Fred, right? In the previous book, Nathaniel's out there, he's got his scrying glass hidden in his pocket, and Fred's like, give me that thing that's in your pocket. Well, yes, there is, I can see it, because he can see the aura, so to speak. Okay? So there are people who can detect this kind of thing. Well, that's going to get discussed and played up more. Page 36, just past the middle of the page. Nathaniel's trying to figure out how he's going to crack the resistance. Certainly the notion that the children could see through their semblance was absurd. He dismissed it out of hand. He doesn't even entertain it. Okay? Kind of like if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings, Sauron doesn't even entertain the idea that somebody might want to destroy the ring. It gives ultimate power, so he thinks everybody's going to be like him. You want ultimate power. Chapter 3, titled, notice, Kitty. Notice the difference between the previous book and this book. Hold on, let me make sure this is true. Yes. In the previous book, where you'd have the chapter number, you also had what? A name. Telling us that's the name of the narrator, or the narrator's perspective is dominating that chapter. Here, it's given as a heading or subheading at the top of the pages. So, Kitty is at the theater, watching the Swan of, Araby and such. She meets up with, no, she doesn't meet up yet. Top of 44, very bottom of 43, top of 44. She's thinking, partially at least, about what they're doing, what they're planning, what's going to happen during/after this performance. And notice we're told, it was born of knowing, this fury that she has in her, it was born of knowing that everything they did was utterly forlorn and useless. It would never change anything. What's the everything they did? Well, what are she and Fred and Stanley going to do shortly after this? They break in and steal some magical objects, right? She's thinking, these little 5 and dime robberies, they're not going to do anything. It didn't matter what they did in the end. It didn't matter what they stole, what daring attacks they made. It would make no difference. Tomorrow, the queues would still be forming in the streets outside the Metropolitan. The spheres would still be watching from above. The magicians would still be elsewhere, enjoying the trappings of their power. So it had always been not true. She knows it's not true, right? Because the commoners had power before Gladstone. Nothing she had ever done had made any difference right from the beginning. Think for a moment of those spheres that are referred to. We don't really have these in Murfreesboro. Let me rephrase that. We don't have these in Murfreesboro, right? We don't have them in Washington, D.C., or New York, or Chicago. Not these. What do we have in New York, D.C., Chicago? Not Murfreesboro, unless you're on the roads. How do you spell that word? See, one of the things he's doing is he's tying in the idea of the surveillance state. Dare I even? Yeah, I will. The panopticon, pan, everything, opticon, seeing, the all-seeing eye. I'll tell you right now, a lot of professors on campus, they don't like that thing. Because that's the panopticon. It sees and records everything that goes on in the classroom. Unless they choose at the beginning of the class to not let it record, which they can do, okay? Because they, what I say in here is my business and my class's business, and it doesn't need to be recorded, because you guys, if you wanted to, you could download these things, and then you could upload them to YouTube yourselves, the whole 9 yards, which is why I record everything and put it on YouTube myself. If anybody's going to say anything, it's right there, okay? What's Stroud getting at with the idea of the spheres? There is no privacy. Okay? If you go to London today, I'll give you a little personal anecdote in a second. If you go to London today, well, take that back. About 5 years ago, the number was that if you live in London or you work or travel, you're visiting London, you are caught in a single 24-hour period about 5,000 times on a surveillance camera in a day. That, obviously if you're not holed up in your room, if you're just going out about your daily business. First time I was in London was 1995, I was teaching a course. And there was an odd CCTV camera, the odd one. Taught another one in 2001. There were a little more, no, not 2001, 2003. There were a few more after 9/11, okay? Taught a course in London in July of 2005. The day we were to fly over, got a phone call about 5:36 in the morning, and it was the person in charge of MTSU's study abroad stuff. And she said, Ted, just want to let you know, as of right now, you're still planning on going. I mean, those were like her first words. What are you talking about? Well, what's going on in London? She woke me up with, what are you talking about? Turn on the TV. So I went and turned on the TV. There was a bombing in London that day. There were actually multiple bombings in London. There was a bombing on a bus, a double-decker bus. There were 2 bombings in the tube system. Okay? And she's saying, as of right now, you're still planning on going. I'm like, okay. Later on, we did still go. We arrived the next morning, fly out here about 7, 8 o'clock at night, arrived 6 or 7 in the morning. London was like nothing I'd ever seen before. When we got into Heathrow, we were seeing cops, armed, semi-automatics, finger on the trigger guard, walking 4, 5, and 6 abreast. So, from here to like here. And they're all carrying semi-automatics, and they're wearing tactical gear. Walking just all over through Heathrow Airport. We get down into London, because our lodgings are pretty much, not quite central London, and do our stuff. And we have a couple hours free that day. And I go out and I go down to central London, Regent Street, that is mentioned here. And you see cops walking, and they're taking the entire sidewalk. Fully armed, everything. And from that visit on, you just started seeing like they grew organically out of the buildings. Cameras everywhere. On that particular trip, there were snipers that you could see on buildings in central London. And not just around Whitehall, the area that's mentioned in here, which is the area of the government offices, shopping districts. Oxford Street, one of the main shopping streets in the world. There were snipers like on every other building. Okay? It's part of that surveillance state mentality. So the magicians have these spheres everywhere, watching everyone. Who does that everyone include? It's not just the commoners. The magicians have got to be a little bit careful themselves. Okay? Page 45. The magicians had long been at the zenith of their power. No one could remember a time when this wasn't so. That's telling us if no one could remember a time when it wasn't so, if we kind of take that literally, at least 70, 80 years. For the most part, they kept themselves removed from the experience of the ordinary commoner, remaining in the center of the city and in the suburbs, where broad, leafy boulevards idled between secretive villas. What lay between was left to everyone else. That is, everyone else got what was left over. Streets clogged with small shops, waste ground, the factories, and brickworks. Magicians passed through occasionally in their great black cars, but otherwise their presence was mainly felt in the vigilance spheres, floating randomly above the streets. Oh, I think that might be. Hold on. What year was this? Yep. I noticed, and I'm going to point it out in a moment, bro. Yeah, I think it'll be today. I think there are some little allusions to J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter stories in this series. These are called vigilance spheres. Why? What do the spheres make commoners be? Careful. Vigilant. How many of you read the Harry Potter novels? Some of you have. Okay. Book 4. Yeah. Book 4. Mad-Eye Moody. What's his motto? It's interesting because in 2005, we saw this in buses, in tubes. There was this constant vigilance. That's what Moody says repeatedly to the students. That is, keep your eyes out. How does that get rephrased? You still hear it some today. If you see something, say something. If something looks out of place, mention it. All right? So, constant vigilance, vigilance spheres. It's the same idea. All right? Kitty's father, the spheres keep us safe. Don't be frightened of them. If you're a good girl, they'll do you no harm. That's the kind of argument that says, well, if you haven't done anything bad, then you don't have anything to worry about. Is that entirely true? No. It's only bad men, thieves, spies who need to be afraid. They took for granted, page 46, the superiority of the magicians and fully accepted the unchanging nature of their rule. They found it reassuring. What's the narrator telling us in that kind of language? They accept it. They find it reassuring. What's that implying about Kitty? Not so much. Okay? We hear about her father's job, how he gets made redundant, that is, gets laid off. Okay? Kitty's mother, same thing. Pages 48, 49. Mrs. Tiernack gets dismissed from her job, and we're told Kitty didn't forget. Okay. 50 and 51, more kind of, stuff going on between Kitty and her father. The police have got to keep a presence. Why? Keep troublemakers on their toes. Believe me, Kitty, they wouldn't act without good intelligence on the matter. What's this telling us that Kitty's father has accepted or bought into? Let me put it that way. Magician superiority, keep going, which is an aspect of what? Propaganda. He buys the propaganda. He believes what the state tells him. Kitty does not. It's pretty clear, or it should be pretty clear. Stroud wants us to identify more with Kitty. Let me rephrase that. Stroud wants us to identify with Kitty. He doesn't want us to identify with her father. All right? If it's not clear, Kitty's going to become one of the she's going to become one of the main characters. I was going to say she's going to become one of the main protagonists. You can only have one protagonist. Protagonist means chief sufferer. Comes from proto-agonist. Agonist, sufferer, like agony. Proto, first or chief. Right? Who in the novels, Right? You can even say this, without having read the third one or finished this one. Who's this? Who's the first or chief sufferer? Nathaniel? They're about him, right? What's the problem with that? What are the novel's titled? It's the Bartimaeus trilogy. It's not the Nathaniel trilogy. Kind of interesting. Usually when you have something titled after the person or after a person's name, it's because that person is the main character. Is the main character Nathaniel, John, or is it Bartimaeus? Who are we meant to identify with? Nathaniel or Bartimaeus? Or is it possible Nathaniel and Bartimaeus are really flip sides of kind of a single character? I don't mean that literally, obviously. I mean like they each represent a different aspect of a single entity, so to speak. Right? It's a pretty interesting question when you think about it. Because Bartimaeus, first and foremost, is what? What does Nathaniel usually call him, refer to him as? He's a demon. Notice, he doesn't call him a jinn. He will later. He'll stop using the demon. Okay? And what do we kind of naturally, here in this world, think of when we hear that word demon? Evil. Okay? So, we read about Kitty and her friend. We read about Kitty in school. Bottom of page 57. Yeah, 57. So she's still talking with Jacob about, his father and his father's books, etc., etc. And now let me go bottom of 56. Kitty says, well, that's magicians for you. We hate them, but what could you do? Okay? Sorry, Jacob says that to Kitty. She says, I was just thinking, you hate the magicians, but your whole family supports them. Remember earlier I had the word here, and this time I'm going to capitalize it. Resistance, and I mentioned that it's probably elusive to the French resistance. Well, similar to the French resistance, similar and opposite, you had in Nazi France, Vichy France first, and then Nazi France, you had collaborators. Those who went along with the Nazis. And when the French resistance got hold of the collaborators, they killed them. Usually without any kind of trial. Okay? Notice the language she uses. Your family supports them. We hate the magicians, but you guys support them. What's she suggesting? If it weren't for people like your family, we wouldn't be in the problems we're in. Your dad, your brother is working in his workshop. Everything you make goes to them one way or another. And yet they treat you so badly. It doesn't seem right. Why doesn't your family do something else? Easy for Kitty to say, right? Jacob grins. My dad's got a saying. Safest place to swim is right behind the shark. Notice it's behind the shark, not where? Not in front of him. We make the magicians beautiful things and that makes them happy. It means they keep off our backs. Jacob's saying his family is doing what?
The sensible thing.
They're just trying to survive. The sensible thing. If we didn't do that, what would happen? If we didn't make these books for us, for them, what would they do? They would turn against us. You're frowning. Kitty was not sure she approved. But if you don't like the magicians, you shouldn't cooperate with them. Notice Stroud doesn't use the word collaborate. I think it's very intentional. He doesn't want to make it crystal clear. It's morally wrong. Oh, there's an absolute. What? Don't give me that. Your parents cooperate with them, right? What did her father do before he was made redundant? He was the head of leather goods at the store. Who bought the leather goods? Satchels, briefcases, belts, things like that. Only the magicians. Everyone does. There's no alternative, is there? In other words, don't go spouting to me your moral superiority when the very fact that you're still living, breathing, eating, drinking is because your family has given in. If you don't, the police or something worse pays a visit in the night and spirits you away. There's no alternative to cooperation, is there? Is there? Okay, spirits you away. Now, interesting, he uses that verb because it can mean literally spirits come and take you away. But that description doesn't echo as much this as it does what? What happened to people in Soviet Russia by the KGB?
You go to Gulag.
If you're lucky, you went to the Gulag. If you weren't lucky, you were just never seen again. That is, you died in maybe Lubyansky prison in central Moscow. Okay? You want to see a good example of this? Watch on Amazon, on Amazon, The Courier with Benedict Cumberbatch. Real event, real history, okay? Cuban Missile Crisis period, about an average, everyday, ordinary businessman who gets involved in international espionage and who rots away in a Russian prison for about 4 years. Okay, I won't give anything else. Just pretty good. Take it back. It's fantastic. No, there isn't. When she replies, suppose not. That is, I suppose there's nothing else that we can do. No, there isn't. Not unless you want to end up dead. You want to take on the government? Okay. Chapter 5. The tragedy had occurred when Kitty was 13 years old. What tragedy? Well, the one that's going to be described. But that 13 years old, that is, page 45, chapter 16, chapter 4, second paragraph. 3 years ago, the park, the ball, their laughter, disaster on its way. So, 3 years ago, chapter 5, the tragedy occurred when Kitty was 13 years old. That was 3 years ago. Kitty's now 16. She's a year and a half, thereabouts, older than Nathaniel. Right? And what do we see? It's a nice summer day. She and Jacob go out, hit, I think the implication is a cricket ball. They've got a bat, ball. In America, we would tend to think baseball. This is probably cricket. It's a hard ball. Okay? They go to an unused park. Is the park for commoners? No. But it's unused. It does have a gate around it, or fence and gate. They go through the not quite tightly closed, locked off gate. One of them swings the bat, hits the ball. Page 63. There followed a terrible smash of breaking glass, a squeal of tires, a loud metallic crump. So, glass breaks, tires squeak, and then you hear that, if you've ever heard a car wreck, like from, a block away or a few houses away, just that crunching of metal. And they run. But they get caught. Bottom of page 65. Gentleman did not seem in a hurry to speak. He was fairly short, stocky, and powerful build. His round face had at its center an uncommonly long, sharp nose, and even in those moments of abject terror suggested Kitty something of a sundial. Well, earlier, this character is described as having an aquiline nose. That is, like a horse. Got a big nose. All right? Who is this? It's Julius Tallow. It's the secretary for, or the, person in charge of internal affairs. It's Nathaniel's boss, 3 years previously. 3 years previously means this is before the Lovelace affair, all right? And what does he do? He says, I love my Rolls Royce. I was taking it out for a spin, and you brats went and attacked me. What happened? I am attacked from nowhere, page 66, by two commoners, brats. You smash my windscreen, make me lose control. I collide with a lamppost, destroying bodywork, tires, and engine, shattering my number plate. And it doesn't. What's he mean by his number plate? License plate. It's a license plate, My car is ruined. It will never run again. What? I want to know what you have to, in other words, justify yourselves. And they apologize. We're just having some fun. So he summons his spirit, who we're told is named Nemeides. It says, I think the Black Tumbler. Page 68. He leaves, and Nemeides stays. And Kitty says, please, don't hurt us. The yellow eyes widened. Why? What does it mean the eyes get larger? It's like, didn't expect that. That's surprise. I'm afraid that is impossible. Now, is this just the demon showing good human manners? Or does the demon really mean, I'm sorry, kid. I have been given my orders, namely to effect the Black Tumbler upon your persons, and I cannot reject this charge without great danger to myself. Would you have me become subject to the shriveling fire? Yeah, I would rather you suffer than me. The demon's tail twitched back and forth like that of an irritated cat. It bent the leg, scratched the back of the opposite knee. No doubt. Well, the situation is unpleasant. How's it unpleasant? What's the demon suggesting? I don't want to do this. I don't take pleasure in doing this. But the demon must do it, right? Because the demon is being compelled. What's the compulsion? I will suffer. I suggest we get it over with as rapidly as possible. Why? Because the longer you wait for it, the worse it becomes. Just get it done with. Okay? And notice, it does this thing. Okay? And what happens to Kitty? Does she suffer a physical deformity like Jacob does? No. Why? Because she seems to be immune to the effects of magic. Okay? So, chapter 6. Now we'll stop there. Okay. I didn't go near as far. So, I'll post a video that'll cover quite a bit, maybe everything, since we won't have class on Thursday. I'm scheduled to arrive for my surgery at 9 o'clock, so we won't be able to meet.